finishing up, our Friday practice with, a lot of focus, obviously, on the red zone. Any questions?
Coach, didn't see any offensive or defensive line?
Yeah, so we changed the schedule this year. There's like a 35, 40-minute segment where we're working route specifics. And so looking at let's call it a 2-hour and 15 practice, we're able to stretch, warm up all the skill groups. O and D line are in the walkthrough initially, then they go inside for a 40-minute, recovery. They're hot tub, cold plunge, rather than them standing. And yet all the, what you didn't see is them coming out, getting stretched, going through field goal block, going through team drills. And so, and it's not just because of a Monday, it's going forward, a schedule we'll look at just relative to load management for those guys.
Sean, have you been able to quantify, because we talked about you being the first with next-gen stats and all the performance stuff, just the more information you have in recent years, how much that's helped you coach and how it helped your team?
Yeah, look, each year, there's new things that come up. Evan Rothstein, we hired this offseason. He's brilliant. We'll present situations. Obviously, we discuss. Look, I've said this before. The analytics, first and foremost, help in drafting or signing players, and then as it pertains to the game, there are some things that vary based on your opponent. So it's not as clean sometimes as just a pitcher and a batter. How's the game unfolding? And all of that factors into some of those decisions, whether to go for it, 2-point plays, all the things that, oftentimes are the main thing that are discussed. So, but yeah, I would say it's always evolving.
Sean, you talked about trying to, be innovative, open to change and all that. To change something like you're talking about the linemen on a Friday game week, that's supposed to kick off. Like how? I know you probably.
Well, it's they practiced.
Yeah.
I mean, you just didn't get to see it. There was just a look. Streif's played in this league a long time, and he and I would talk for the last 2 or 3 years about how long are we out on Friday, and we looked at it the other night and came up with a way where they essentially did everything they would do on a Friday, and we were able to grab 40 minutes of recovery within the framework of the practice. So, you're constantly looking at your schedules. You don't want to just turn the page, and I think it worked out well.
With the game upon us, anything you can share on Greenlaw or Road?
Nothing.
How you list them?
Yeah, but that would mean I'm sharing it. Yeah, it'll come out.
We don't get you that. Can I come to your office then and ask you about it?
No.
I'm going to ask Sean about that position, though.
What position?
The off-ball linebackers. How has that changed the last several years?
No, that's a great question. I think let's go 15 years back. It was very easy to identify and scout that position. It was more difficult maybe to scout the left and right tackle position. Now, the same thing with receiver. As the college game has evolved, you're getting plenty of reps to see pass protection. That position specifically, now you're seeing smaller players, space players. And so if you look at our league and just took the starters, and, we drafted the linebacker at Philly, Bond. Now Wisconsin with Leonard, he was playing like an edge position, had a lot of sacks. And so it's a little bit like, it's one of those things where you may have to project that where 15 years ago you saw so much more two-back offense. You saw Mike, you saw Will, you know, and now you're in these nickel dime fronts and coverages. So some positions are easier to scout today, and then some, on the other hand, maybe are a little bit more challenging. And I think, that would be one of them, just as the games progress. So sometimes it involves, look, our starting Mike linebacker was in Canada, played special teams for the Eagles, and then, so that journey, started in the dugout, not on third base. I mean, he had to get to first and then take. So, and then there are the exceptions where you see a Keekly right away, and you know that. But I think that I think it's a little bit harder to identify sometimes.
Sean, because of injuries, Sternad had to play a lot last year. What did you like about him that you wanted him back?
Well, number one, we knew he was a real good special teams player. So the vision of being able to play inside, play teams, you want to answer the question, how many snaps is he going to play if he's linebacker 3? Obviously, if he's linebacker 2. And so once you get past your starters, these guys got to contribute in the kicking game. And I would say he's got real good football IQ.
Coach, the Broncos over the past 50 years have the best Week 1 home record. Besides having a good team.
Besides me arriving here.
Besides having a good team, did you think altitude, conditioning, or things early in the season?
Well, look, it's a great question. I think altitude every week. Before we knew all the specifics, when we would come here, we thought, let's get in Friday. And the science, says 10 days before, which is impossible. And if you can't get in 10 days before, as late as possible. And so, I think there's two things. It's our home crowd that's got a great tradition. And then on top of that, the actual physical, it's not a mental thing, it's a real thing. And that's why, so many of our Olympic athletes are training at altitude and then going to sea level to compete. So we've got the last thing I just finished saying was, we're playing at home, and we've got to make this, the hardest place to play.
Last night's game had some teachables from a do's and don'ts standpoint. Was there anything you went over with the team about?
Yeah, I didn't see any of the game. I heard about it. I clipped out all the behavior fouls, put them on a cut up. We hit officiating before we hit talked about, the points of emphasis this year, the taunting, all the stuff that can keep your team from winning a game. And then obviously the points of emphasis relative to the line of scrimmage, tackles, defensive players, neutral zone. But those clips were on a film this morning. That's something we would do kind of weekly. Having been on the competition committee, and when they have these points of emphasis, these early weeks you see high spikes. They're writing the speeding tickets early, and then generally, it calms.
Yeah, when the refs were here, they talked about the line of scrimmage. Is that overemphasizing with your whiteouts or anybody?
No, look, with number one, that forever the receivers have looked and talked with, and communicated with, and these guys will, but they're not going to be in charge of your alignment. And so, whoever's on the ball, has to be able to look in and make sure, his foot's behind the football, in line with maybe the inside leg of the tackle, and then the off-the-ball player. But it's, if you're not paying attention and you're lining up, you might be halfway into the football, and not even realize it. So they're cleaning that up. 4 years ago, shoot, I could put a cut up together. You wouldn't recognize some of the formations, and then it's like anything else. This thing's cyclical. This is the second time around. Motions where receivers start shaving, every 8 to 10 years, it's cyclical. So, but, a good opportunity for us to see a game last night and just say, hey, this and the crew we have this week, 2 of the last 3 years have been number 1 in fouls called. This past season they were 7th, but so this is a crew that's going to call it, close to the vest.
Obviously, Nik got the contract yesterday. So when you first got here a couple of years ago, what did you see as Nik's ceiling where he could go?
Yeah, great question. Look, his superpower is his get off, his bend, and when I first got here, it was a room with a lot of different players, and so it took a minute for us to sort through how we wanted to handle the depth at that room. Who was going to be, a part of it, and then, who wasn't going to be a part of it. But it was important, coming in, and I learned this, from Bill, was, to come in and don't prejudge, allow them to show you. There's a lot of players on that team that'll be part of a championship and want to be part of the right culture and all the, but you can't try to predict that. You just let them show. And I've seen him grow just as a leader, maturity. He's a young player coming into this league, but it's great to see the confidence he's playing with, and I'm excited he's with us now for quite a while.
So I think is it a good reminder, guys like him, the developmental curve sometimes?
Yeah, especially, look, when my first 3-4 years in New Orleans, Mr. Benson, the late Mr. Benson, would always say, man, we're not drafting juniors, are we? And now, and I understood, the question. But when you look at each draft, it's almost like where the NBA used to be. The NBA used to play 3, and now it's 1. But there's some juniors that, we go through this process, and I don't think junior or senior, we evaluate them enough, and I think, where's their maturity level, where's their football IQ, where's their passion, what's their, mental toughness like. All of those things can appear with a junior or not, and with a senior or not. Just because you're there an extra year, you still may have things that are going to prohibit you maybe from being successful in our league. So, but I think his growth occurred as that room changed.
Is the extension indicative that you guys see him as what, not just a speed rusher anymore, but his growth in the run game?
Yeah, well, certainly. Look, the extension is we see him as a starting outside linebacker. Yeah, there's certain things, strengths and weaknesses. Sure, they're going to run that way if they're looking at he and Cooper, and he understands that, and so. It's just hard to find guys. When we all played football, we used 3 Mississippi or 1,000, 2 1,000, 3. It was usually 3, and it's hard to find guys to make the quarterback throw on 2 Mississippi. Or someone when you played would start rushing early, and they didn't do their count. So when you speed that up, that makes it difficult on the quarterback.
Sean, I'm noticing more about you than it is about them pretty much every week. Is that especially true in week 1?
Well, the second thing I told him was, after we talked about a home game, is, look, the scouting of an opponent is essential. who plays where, who has ball skills, who's their better run player, who's their better receiver. You have to know the opponent cold, and yet it's a faceless opponent relative to the work week. And Sunday's game will have been won during the work week, long before kickoff. And they have to understand that relative to how you prepare and what Monday's like, what Wednesday's like. I mean, what it's really like on an elite team. And many times, most of the times, those games are won before the ball's ever been kicked off.
Then how's your preparation been?
It's been good.
All three of the players you guys signed to extensions this offseason talked about how they had to battle self-doubt earlier in their career. Zach said there was a game early in his career he was sure he was getting cut afterwards. Cortland said early in his first OTAs, he's like, called his old position coach, said, I can't do this. When you're evaluating guys, how much is like it knowing that they are going to hit those roads and understanding how they might be able to?
I think it's a great question, and it starts back in the beginning. Saban said this the other day on a podcast. He was talking about toughness, and the topic came up, and obviously you have to be physical and tough to play this game. But as you think about mental toughness, how much can you take? In other words, what's your threshold? Relative to adversity, relative to, and then he used the analogy of, he bought this Florida house, and the builder says, we have hurricane windows, A, B, and C. A is going to cost you more, but they can withstand, 180-mile winds. B, C, and we're looking for those A players, and there's a little bit of grit to that. Sometimes it's one of the harder things to scout, but those guys, when you get them, succeed. Because their mental toughness, they're able to handle the 180-mile-an-hour winds that come in this league sometimes, whether it's tough losses, whether it's being benched, whether it's a tough game. They're able to handle the next play even. We talk about, hey, get on to the next play. And there are guys that do that very well, and there's some guys that don't, and you have to be able to do that in this league. We'll talk about that when we review the film. Get on to the next play. And so that I thought was a pretty good description of mental toughness, and how much can you withstand. And so we're trying to find those players.